Today, the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on Near Eastern and South and Central Asian Affairs meets to examine the efforts to combat the proliferation of improvised explosive devices, IEDs as we know them by the acronym, and the role of terrorist organizations in Pakistan. We are now meeting in open session, which will be followed by a closed session where we can explore these issues more deeply in a classified setting. This subcommittee met more than 2 years ago to examine the scourge of IEDs in Afghanistan and the flow of precursor materials from Pakistan. Today we hope to review the status of those efforts since November of 2010. It's instructive to start with two stories about two of my constituents whose lives were forever changed by IEDs. And I'm sure there are members of the House and the Senate that could provide stories from their own states. On my left, there's a photograph of Adam Keyes. Adam moved from Canada to the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania. That's on the eastern side of our state. He moved there as a teenager and joined the U.S. Army after he got his green card. In July of 2010, Adam's vehicle hit an IED in Zabul province. The 14-ton mine-resistant armored vehicle was thrown into the air by the blast. 4 soldiers in the truck were killed, including Adam's best friend from Whitehall High School in Pennsylvania, Jesse Reed. Adam lost both legs and one arm, his left arm, and he has had more than 100 surgeries to repair the damage to his body. There was a news account that said he had 120 surgeries. I just saw him last week at Walter Reed, and he said the number was actually 130 surgeries. I first met Adam back in March of 2011 and had the great opportunity to see him in Bethesda just recently. Now an American citizen and promoted to sergeant, Adam's road to recovery has been incredibly long. He's a true inspiration to all of us, and he and his family are in our prayers. I want to add a footnote here. I've probably never met anyone who's been through so much horror and still has a sense of optimism. The day I saw him, he was about to move from one area of Walter Reed to the next, and he was anticipating that move in a matter of hours or minutes when I saw him, and he was in great spirits. On my right is a photograph of Nick Stayback. Nick is an Army specialist from the county in Pennsylvania that I live in, Lackawanna County. And I knew his grandfather served in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. In October of 2011, Nick was on a foot patrol in the Arghandab Valley in Afghanistan when an IED exploded in his path. He lost both legs and spent the past year recovering at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda. Nick's mother, Maria, took a leave of absence from her job to move to Bethesda to be with Nick as he learned how to walk on prosthetic legs. I met Nick and his family shortly after his return from Afghanistan, and I was awed and inspired by his positive attitude and his determination not to let his injury slow him down or stop him from doing the things that he loves. In fact, I understand from his mother that Nick is down in Texas on a hunting trip as we speak. And the day that I first met him, that was one of the objectives that he had upon leaving Walter Reed, was to figure out a way to keep hunting in the future. Again, a tremendous sense of optimism and positive thinking that characterized both these patriots. Nick is now 21 years old, and he's moved into an apartment near the hospital, and we're all optimistic that he has a bright future ahead of him. We have no doubt about that. As public officials, we owe nothing less than our greatest efforts and then some to confront this terrible weapon of war. On behalf of Nick, Adam, and the thousands of other U.S. forces still out there today on patrol, we need to redouble our efforts and our focus on stopping the illicit flow of these deadly IED precursor materials. or I should say precursor chemicals. And as I think through how to attack this issue diplomatically and otherwise, every step is taken with Nick and Adam and thousands of others in mind. Over the past 2.5 years, I've sought to raise the profile of the threat of IEDs in Afghanistan. In 2010, I introduced a resolution which passed unanimously calling for increased efforts by Pakistan, Afghanistan, and their neighbors to prevent ammonium nitrate fertilizer from entering Afghanistan. As mentioned, I chaired a hearing in this subcommittee to hear testimony on the steps the U.S. could take to minimize the threat of IEDs. Soon thereafter, I commissioned a report from the General Accountability Office to examine this issue, particularly U.S. cooperation with Pakistan. I've also pushed for conditioning aid to Pakistan based on its progress on this issue. At the end of last year, I introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act which would prohibit some security assistance, operative word there being some security assistance from going to Pakistan until the government demonstrates a demonstrated commitment to stopping the flow of IED components. I'm glad to say that our own interagency structure has elevated this issue and that it has raised it at the most senior levels in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other international forums. In fact, I've had excellent communication with our ambassador in Islamabad, Richard Olson, who just yesterday sent me a letter with an update on efforts to restrict the availability of IED components, improve the counter-IED abilities of Pakistani law enforcement and security forces, and raise public awareness about the groups that wield these deadly weapons. I'm glad that Ambassador Olson is making this such a priority in his work as ambassador, and I look forward to working with him closely to ensure that Pakistan follows through on its commitments. During this, or I should say, despite this interagency focus, much work remains to be done. The Department of Defense's Section 1230 report on progress towards security and stability in Afghanistan, released this month, acknowledge that relations with Pakistan have improved, but says, and I quote, Pakistan's continued acceptance of sanctuaries for Afghan-focused insurgents and failure to interdict IED materials and components continue to undermine the security of Afghanistan and pose an enduring threat to U.S., coalition, and Afghan forces, unquote. Pakistan has also acutely felt the terrible impact of these weapons. I get reports from the Pakistani embassy on the casualty counts of these Pakistani civilian and security forces killed in terrorist attacks. According to the latest embassy reports, 37,990 Pakistani civilians have been killed in terrorist attacks since 2001. So almost just a little shy of 38,000 people killed in that time period. In addition, 6,416 security forces have perished as well. The U.S. Embassy tells me that Pakistan has lost 2,395 people, including civilians, to IEDs over the past 12 months, so just in the last year. Each one of these deaths is a tragedy, and it's important that we honor and acknowledge the enormous sacrifices that Pakistanis have made in the struggle against violent extremism in their own country. Pakistan is key to preventing bomb components from making their way into Afghanistan. That's why we're here today. When I traveled to Pakistan in the summer of 2011 with Senators Whitehouse, Blumenthal, and Bennett, we raised this issue repeatedly with Pakistani officials, whether it was the President, the Prime Minister, General Kiani, anyone we talked to. We raised this issue over and over and over again. Based on these exchanges and others over the years, I believe that Pakistan's leaders understand the problem and share our interest in preventing more American, Pakistani, and Afghan casualties due to IEDs. In 2011, Pakistan drafted a strategic plan to combat IEDs. And by the way, we were presented with that plan on our visit, and they made commitments to implement it. On October 5th of this year, Interior Minister Malik visited the United States to participate in a bilateral working group on the issue. These are promising steps, and I commend the Pakistani government for this commitment. In recent months, there appears to have been significant activity, and Pakistan has worked closely with the U.S. on moving this forward. While I'm pleased that Pakistan has developed a very detailed and comprehensive set of plans to counter IEDs, let me be clear. It's time to finally and fully implement these plans. IED incidents have risen in Afghanistan. The flow of chemicals coming from across the border has not diminished. We continue to see far too many IED casualties at Walter Reed and Bethesda. Thousands of Pakistanis died in the past year, as I've mentioned. We need to see execution of these plans. We need to see, in a word, action. Given the gravity of this threat and the mounting casualty toll, the current pace of activity by the Pakistani government is not acceptable. At the November 2010 hearing that we had, I laid out the following benchmarks for Pakistan. First, I said they need to do more to strengthen the legislative framework to restrict the sale and transport of ammonium nitrate and other IED precursor materials like potassium chlorate. Second, I called for a better tracking and accountability system for these chemicals inside the country, from producer to distributor to final purchase. Finally, at that hearing, I urged that the U.S. and Pakistan work together to employ better controls along the border with Afghanistan. In addition to the important responsibilities borne by governments to tackle this problem, the private sector can also play a constructive role. Members of the fertilizer industry in Pakistan have the opportunity to be good corporate citizens. They should also understand that they are part of a broader global corporate community where reputations matter, just like they do here in Washington. The failure to take action could have an adverse impact on their ability to do business in the future. And we met with some of those folks in August of 2011 in our visit to Islamabad. I look forward to a readout from our witnesses on where we stand and what we as a country are doing to accelerate our efforts to finally turn back this tide. I want to thank both JIDO and the Department of State for working closely with me on this critical issue over the past 2 years.